The motor pool at Forward Operating Base Carson stretched across 3 acres of hard-packed dirt, lined with rows of M1A2 Abrams tanks that sat silent in the pre-dawn darkness. Each machine weighed 70 tons, their massive frames casting geometric shadows under the sparse floodlights. The air carried the familiar scent of diesel fuel, gun oil, and the metallic tang that always lingered around heavy armor. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya Chen stood at the edge of the maintenance bay, her small frame dwarfed by the towering bulk of the nearest tank. At 5 feet 2 inches and barely 110 pounds, she looked like a child next to these steel giants. Her regulation combat uniform hung loose on her shoulders, the sleeves rolled up twice to accommodate her shorter arms. The heavy Kevlar vest made her appear even smaller, if that was possible. She'd heard the whispers since the day she arrived at Carson 6 months ago. Too small, too weak, wrong body type for tank operations. The comments followed her through the chow hall, drifted from behind supply trucks, and echoed in the barracks after lights out. Most of the crew chiefs wouldn't even consider her for their teams. Tank warfare required strength, they said. Physical presence, the ability to manhandle 60-pound shells and wrestle with controls that demanded serious muscle. Maya had proven them wrong in training, but training was different. Clean ranges, controlled conditions, instructors watching every move. Here in the field, with real missions and real consequences, doubt crept back into every conversation. She could see it in their eyes when assignments came down from command. The quick glances, the subtle headshakes, the way conversations stopped when she walked past. The tank closest to her bore the name Iron Wolf, stenciled in white letters across its turret. She'd been assigned to its crew 3 weeks ago, after their regular driver rotated home. The crew chief, Staff Sergeant Williams, had made his feelings clear from the first day. He was a 20-year veteran with arms like tree trunks and a voice that could cut through engine noise at 100 yards. When he looked at Maya, his expression suggested he was calculating how quickly she'd wash out. The other crew members had been more subtle but no less skeptical. Rodriguez, the gunner, was polite but distant. Thompson, the loader, helped her with equipment, but always with the careful patience someone might show a younger sibling who was trying to keep up. Jackson, the commander, was fair, but reserved judgment. They worked together efficiently, but Maya could feel the invisible barrier between herself and the rest of the team. This morning felt different. The urgency in the air was thicker than usual. Orders had come down during the night watch, and now the entire motor pool hummed with activity that spoke of something more serious than routine patrol. Maya had been awake since 0400, running through pre-combat checks on Iron Wolf systems. Every gauge, every control, every mechanism that would need to respond perfectly when the moment came. She climbed up onto the tank's front slope, her boots finding purchase on the textured metal surface. The driver's hatch gaped open like a mechanical mouth, revealing the cramped compartment that would be her world for the next several hours. The seat was positioned low and forward, surrounded by an array of controls, displays, and vision blocks that allowed the driver to see the world outside while remaining protected within the tank's armored hull. Maya lowered herself into the driver's position and began her systematic check of the controls. The steering yoke felt solid under her hands, designed for larger grips but manageable with proper technique. The accelerator and brake pedals required significant pressure, but she'd trained her legs to deliver the force needed. Every switch and lever had been positioned with male crew members in mind, but Maya had learned to adapt her movements to reach everything efficiently. The intercom crackled to life as the rest of the crew took their positions. Williams' voice came through clear and authoritative. "Driver, report status." "All systems green, Sergeant," Maya replied, her voice steady despite the tension building in her chest. "Hydraulics nominal, engine pre-start complete, communications check positive." "Copy that." There was no warmth in his tone, but no criticism either. Just professional acknowledgement of her report. Rodriguez settled into the gunner's position to her right and slightly behind, his hands moving across the fire control systems with practiced precision. Thompson took his place in the turret, ready to handle the main gun ammunition. Jackson positioned himself in the commander's cupola, where he could coordinate with other units and direct their movement across the battlefield. The mission briefing had been brief but sobering. A Marine reconnaissance unit operating near the contested village of Khalil had lost contact with headquarters 12 hours ago. Satellite imagery showed enemy movement in the area, and intelligence suggested the Marines were pinned down somewhere in the village's northern sector. Multiple attempts to reach them by radio had failed. The terrain made helicopter extraction impossible, and enemy air defenses ruled out close air support. That left the ground option. A tank platoon would punch through enemy positions and create a corridor for the Marines to withdraw. It was a straightforward mission on paper, but Maya knew the reality would be far more complicated. Urban combat with heavy armor was always dangerous. Narrow streets, limited visibility, enemy fighters with anti-tank weapons hidden in buildings. The kind of environment where every decision mattered and mistakes were measured in lives lost. Maya's hands rested on the controls as she waited for the order to move. She'd driven Iron Wolf through dozens of training exercises, but this would be her first real combat mission as the primary driver. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders like a physical force, 68 tons of American steel, and 4 crew members depending on her ability to navigate them safely through whatever waited ahead. The radio in Jackson's position burst to life with traffic from the platoon leader. All Gladiator elements, this is Gladiator 6, the mission is gone. We have 40 Marines depending on us to bring them home. Execute on my mark. Maya felt her heart rate increase, but kept her breathing steady. This was what she'd trained for. What she'd endured months of doubt and skepticism to prove she could do. The engine beneath her seat rumbled to life with a deep, powerful growl that vibrated through the entire hull. Hydraulic systems pressurized with soft hissing sounds. Display screens flickered on, showing status indicators and navigation data. "Iron Wolf, move out!" Jackson's voice came through the intercom. "Follow Gladiator 6. Maintain interval." Maya engaged the transmission and felt the massive tank begin to roll forward, 70 tons of armor and firepower responding to the pressure of her foot on the accelerator. The sensation never got old, that moment when the machine accepted her input and translated it into motion. She guided Iron Wolf out of the motor pool and onto the dirt road that led toward the main gate. The column of tanks stretched ahead of her, 4 M1A2 Abrams moving in single file through the early morning darkness. Their engines created a rumbling symphony that could be heard for miles, a sound that meant safety to American forces and danger to anyone who stood against them. Maya kept her position in the formation, maintaining the proper distance from the tank ahead, while monitoring her instruments for any sign of mechanical problems. As they passed through the base perimeter and onto the main highway, Maya caught glimpses of the surrounding landscape through her vision blocks. Rolling hills dotted with sparse vegetation, occasional clusters of buildings, power lines running parallel to the road. The peaceful appearance was deceptive. Intelligence reports indicated enemy forces had been moving through this area for weeks, setting up positions and preparing for exactly this kind of American response. The voice traffic on the radio painted a picture of a complex battlefield. Other units were moving to support the mission, creating diversions and blocking enemy reinforcements. Artillery was standing by to provide fire support. Medical evacuation teams were positioning themselves at rally points. The entire operation revolved around getting those 40 Marines out alive, and Maya was now part of that effort. She could feel Williams' presence in the commander's position above her, probably studying maps and coordinating with the other tanks in their section. Rodriguez would be scanning for targets through his thermal sights. Thompson was likely running through his own mental checklist, preparing for whatever engagement lay ahead. Each of them focused on their piece of the mission, trusting the others to handle theirs. The highway began to curve toward higher ground, and Maya adjusted her steering to keep Iron Wolf tracking smoothly through the turns. The suspension absorbed most of the road irregularities, but she could still feel every bump and dip transmitted through the driver's seat. Her hands maintained a light but firm grip on the controls, ready to respond instantly to any change in conditions or orders from Jackson. In the distance, she could see the first scattered buildings of Khalil appearing on the horizon. Somewhere in that maze of streets and structures, 40 American Marines were waiting for rescue. Maya pressed her lips together in determination and kept the tank moving forward, carrying her crew toward whatever waited in the darkness ahead. The first checkpoint appeared as a cluster of concrete barriers and razor wire stretched across the highway. Iraqi police vehicles flanked both sides of the road, their occupants waving the tank column through without inspection. Maya downshifted as Iron Wolf approached the obstacle course of Jersey barriers, threading the massive tank through the narrow opening with practiced precision. The clearance was tight, less than 2 feet on either side, but she'd navigated worse during urban training exercises. Beyond the checkpoint, the landscape began to change. Scattered farmhouses gave way to more densely packed buildings. Irrigation ditches crisscrossed the terrain, forcing the column to stick to the main road rather than spreading out across open ground. Maya could see dust clouds rising in the distance where other American units were maneuvering, part of the broader operation designed to isolate the target area. Jackson's voice came through the intercom, calm but focused. "Driver, reduce speed. We're entering the approach phase." Maya eased back on the accelerator, feeling Iron Wolf's massive weight settle as their forward momentum decreased. Through her vision blocks, she watched the tank ahead of them, Gladiator 6, slow to a crawl as they neared the outskirts of Khalil. The village spread across a low hillside, its buildings a mixture of traditional mud brick structures and more modern concrete construction. Narrow streets wound between dense clusters of houses, creating a maze that would challenge even experienced tank crews. Rodriguez's voice broke the silence. "Movement 2 o'clock, approximately 800 meters. Looks like civilian traffic evacuating the area." Maya caught glimpses of vehicles moving on parallel roads, small trucks and civilian cars heading away from the village center. The smart locals were getting out before the shooting started. Those who remained would either be fighters or people with nowhere else to go. The distinction would matter once they entered the urban environment. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The radio crackled with updates from other elements of the operation. Air assets were reporting visual contact with smoke rising from the northern section of Khalil, possibly indicating the Marines' position. The artillery was adjusting fire missions to support the rescue operation. Combat engineers were standing by to clear obstacles if the tanks encountered roadblocks or improvised explosive devices. Williams' voice came through the intercom with new instructions. "All stations, we're approaching Phase Line Alpha. Switch to combat spacing, maintain visual contact with adjacent units." Maya increased the distance between Iron Wolf and the tank ahead, giving them room to maneuver if contact came suddenly. The wider spacing also reduced the chance that a single enemy weapon could disable multiple vehicles. She adjusted her position slightly to the right, creating an offset pattern that would make it harder for enemy fighters to predict their exact route. The buildings grew taller and closer together as they approached the village proper. Maya could see narrow alleyways branching off from the main street, perfect hiding spots for fighters with rocket-propelled grenades or improvised explosive devices. Every doorway, every window, every rooftop became a potential threat that required constant vigilance from the crew. Thompson's voice came through the intercom, slightly tense. "I've got eyes on what looks like barricades ahead, maybe 400 meters. Concrete blocks and debris across the street." Jackson acknowledged the report and relayed it to the platoon leader. Maya could hear radio traffic as the other tank commanders discussed options for bypassing or clearing the obstacle. The Marine rescue mission couldn't afford delays, but driving blindly into a prepared ambush would help no one. "Iron Wolf, this is Gladiator 6, the platoon leader's voice came through clearly. "Take the eastern route, bypass the main barricade. Link up with us at Checkpoint Bravo." Maya felt a familiar tightness in her chest. The eastern route meant navigating through side streets barely wide enough for a tank, with limited support from the other vehicles in the platoon. It was exactly the kind of mission that played to her strengths as a driver, but also the kind that made crew chiefs nervous about having someone her size at the controls. "Copy, Gladiator 6, Jackson replied. "Iron Wolf proceeding via the eastern route." Maya turned the steering yoke to the right, guiding the 70-ton tank off the main road and onto a narrow street lined with 2-story buildings. The clearance was minimal, less than 18 inches on either side. One miscalculation would send them crashing through someone's living room or wedging the tank immovably between concrete walls. She'd practiced this kind of precision driving for months, but always on training courses designed for the purpose. Here, the stakes were real. 40 Marines were depending on their ability to reach the extraction point, and getting Iron Wolf stuck in a narrow street would end the mission before it really began. The tank's width sensors beeped softly as they squeezed between a parked pickup truck and a concrete utility pole. Maya made micro-adjustments to her steering, drawing on every hour of training to keep the massive vehicle tracking straight down the center of the available space. Behind her, she could hear Rodriguez scanning for threats through his thermal sight, while Thompson kept watch through his own vision blocks. A dog ran across their path, disappearing into an alley without looking back. Laundry hung from lines stretched between buildings, some of it brushing against Iron Wolf's turret as they passed underneath. The normal signs of civilian life, but Maya knew that appearances could be deceiving in urban combat environments. "Contact left, building with green door," Rodriguez called out suddenly. "Individual with what looks like an AK-47 second-floor window." Maya maintained her course while Jackson made the tactical decision. Continue the mission, not immediately threatening our movement. The building passed by slowly, and Maya caught a glimpse of a figure in the window Rodriguez had identified. Whether fighter or frightened civilian, there was no way to tell from their current position. The rules of engagement were clear about when they could fire, but the ambiguity of urban warfare made every decision complex. The street began to widen as they approached what looked like a small marketplace. Vendor stalls lined both sides of the road, most of them abandoned but still containing merchandise and equipment. Maya navigated between overturned carts and scattered goods, careful not to create unnecessary destruction that might block their exit route. Thompson's voice came through the intercom with a note of concern. "Sergeant, I'm seeing what might be a command wire running along the left side of the street. Could be IED indicators." Williams immediately got on the radio to report the potential threat to higher headquarters. Combat engineers would need to investigate the area once the immediate mission was complete, but for now they had to assume the worst and adjust their route accordingly. Maya shifted Iron Wolf toward the center of the street, away from the suspected wire. The tank's weight would probably set off any buried explosive device regardless of the exact track placement, but there was no point in making things easier for the enemy. She increased their speed slightly, trading caution for the element of surprise. The marketplace ended abruptly at a T-intersection where their narrow street met a broader avenue. Maya could see the rest of the platoon moving parallel to their position about 2 blocks to the west, their dust clouds visible above the intervening buildings. Radio chatter indicated they were making good progress toward the rally point, where the rescue operation would begin in earnest. "Driver, turn left at the intersection," Jackson directed. "We need to link up with the rest of the platoon before proceeding to the target area." Maya acknowledged the order and began her approach to the turn. The intersection was wide enough to accommodate Iron Wolf's turning radius, but she'd have to swing wide to avoid clipping the corner building with their rear quarter. As she began the maneuver, Rodriguez suddenly called out another contact. Multiple individuals on rooftops, north side of the intersection, at least 3, possibly more. They're moving but not presenting weapons. The tactical situation was becoming more complex as they penetrated deeper into the village. Whether the people Rodriguez was tracking were civilians, scouts for enemy fighters, or actual combatants remained unclear. Maya completed her turn and accelerated down the new street, knowing that their best protection was to keep moving toward their objective. The sound of distant gunfire echoed off the building walls, coming from somewhere ahead of their position. Small arms fire, probably automatic weapons, with the occasional sharp crack of what might be sniper fire. The Marines they were trying to rescue were clearly still in contact with enemy forces. Maya's hands tightened on the controls as Iron Wolf rolled toward the sound of the guns, carrying her crew deeper into the urban battlefield where 40 American lives hung in the balance. The rally point sat in a depression between 2 hills hidden from direct observation by the surrounding terrain. Maya guided Iron Wolf down a gentle slope to where the other 3 tanks in their section had formed a defensive circle. Dust hung in the air from their movement, creating a brown haze that would dissipate slowly in the still morning air. Jackson climbed out of his commander's position to attend the final coordination meeting with the other tank commanders. Maya remained in her driver's seat, monitoring the radio traffic and keeping Iron Wolf's engine at idle. Through her vision blocks, she could see the other drivers doing the same, their machines ready to move at a moment's notice. The plan was straightforward but dangerous. Intelligence had narrowed down the Marines' location to a 3-block area in Khalil's northern district. The buildings there were older, with thick walls and flat rooftops that provided good defensive positions, but also created a maze of potential ambush sites. Enemy fighters had been using the area as a stronghold for weeks, and they weren't likely to give it up without a fight. Rodriguez adjusted his gun controls and reported what he could see through his thermal sight. "I've got heat signatures in the village, maybe half a dozen scattered across different buildings. Hard to tell if they're civilians or hostiles from this distance." Thompson checked his ammunition load for the 3rd time, ensuring each round was properly seated and ready for rapid loading. The main gun carried 42 rounds of various types, from armor-piercing sabot rounds designed to destroy enemy tanks to high-explosive shells meant for bunkers and buildings. Today's mission would likely require the latter. Maya could hear the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors in the distance, probably a medical evacuation bird moving into position at a nearby landing zone. The presence of medevac assets meant command was serious about getting everyone out alive, but it also reminded her how dangerous the next few hours were likely to be. A new voice came over the radio, call sign Viper 6. The battalion commander was now monitoring their frequency directly, which meant the mission had risen to the highest levels of attention. When full colonels started watching individual tank movements, the stakes couldn't get much higher. Jackson returned to Iron Wolf and dropped back into his commander's position. His briefing was concise and urgent. Contact confirmed in Buildings 4 through 7 on the northern approach. Marines are holding the 2nd floor of Building 6, approximately 20 personnel visible, others presumed inside. Enemy strength estimated at company level, dispersed throughout the immediate area. Maya felt her heart rate increase but kept her breathing steady. A company-level enemy force meant they were facing between 100 and 200 fighters, armed with everything from small arms to anti-tank weapons. The odds weren't favorable, but tanks had faced worse and prevailed. "Orders are simple," Jackson continued through the intercom. "We punch through their perimeter, establish a corridor, and hold it open while the Marines withdraw to Extraction Point Charlie. Time on target is 8 minutes from now." Williams' voice came through with tactical details. "The driver route will take us through the Market District, then north along what used to be the main commercial street. Expect obstacles. Expect resistance. Keep us moving no matter what." Maya acknowledged the order and felt Iron Wolf lurch forward as the tank platoon began its approach to the village. The other 3 tanks spread out in a line formation, creating multiple targets for enemy anti-tank teams while maximizing their own firepower coverage. She maintained her position in the formation, watching the spacing carefully as they moved up the slope toward Khalil's outskirts. The first sign of enemy activity came as they crested the hill overlooking the village. A rocket-propelled grenade streaked across their front, missing the lead tank by less than 50 meters before impacting harmlessly in an empty field. The shooter had fired too early, probably from nervousness, but it announced that the enemy was ready and waiting. Rodriguez immediately began scanning for the RPG team's position while Jackson coordinated with the other tanks. "Contact front, RPG team in the white building with blue trim, approximately 600 meters." The response was immediate and devastating. 2 tanks fired high-explosive rounds almost simultaneously, the shells impacting the target building within seconds of each other. The structure collapsed in a cloud of dust and debris, eliminating the threat and sending a clear message to any other fighters watching from concealment. Maya kept Iron Wolf moving as they entered the village proper. The streets were completely empty now, not even the dogs and cats that usually populated Middle Eastern towns. Windows were shuttered, doors were barred, and the silence felt oppressive despite the rumble of tank engines and the distant sound of gunfire from the Marines' position. The Market District appeared ahead of them, a maze of vendor stalls and small shops that would funnel the tanks into predictable routes. Maya could see that several stalls had been repositioned to create choke points, probably concealing improvised explosive devices or anti-tank mines. The enemy had used their time well to prepare the battlefield. "All Gladiator elements, be advised we have multiple IED indicators throughout the market area," the platoon leader announced. "Proceed with caution but maintain momentum." Maya shifted into a higher gear and increased their speed. The best defense against roadside bombs was to minimize the time spent in the kill zone. Iron Wolf's armor could probably survive most improvised explosives, but there was no point in testing that theory unnecessarily. The first explosion came as they passed between 2 overturned fruit stands. The blast was off to their left, close enough to rock the tank slightly but not powerful enough to cause serious damage. Maya felt a concussion through the driver's seat and saw debris rain down on their front slope, but all systems remained green. IED left side, no damage, she reported calmly, though her knuckles were white on the steering controls. Rodriguez was already searching for secondary threats. I've got muzzle flashes from the building complex at 2 o'clock. Multiple shooters, small arms fire. The bullets began striking Iron Wolf's armor with metallic pinging sounds that penetrated even the heavy insulation of the crew compartment. Maya could see sparks flying off their turret and main gun as enemy fighters poured automatic weapons fire at them from concealed positions. The rounds couldn't penetrate their armor, but the psychological effect was considerable. Thompson's voice came through the intercom with professional calm. Target building, high explosive, ready. Fire, Jackson ordered immediately. The main gun roared, and Maya felt the familiar shudder as the huge weapon cycled. Through her vision blocks, she saw the enemy building erupt in flame and smoke as the 120mm shell found its mark. The small arms fire stopped abruptly. They cleared the market district and entered what had once been Khalil's main commercial area. Larger buildings lined both sides of the street, their upper floors providing perfect positions for enemy snipers and anti-tank teams. Maya could see movement in several windows, quick shadows that appeared and disappeared as fighters repositioned themselves. The sound of American gunfire was getting louder now, coming from directly ahead of their position. The Marines were still fighting, which meant they were still alive. Maya pressed harder on the accelerator, pushing Iron Wolf to its maximum safe speed through the urban terrain. A massive explosion erupted just ahead of the lead tank, sending a geyser of concrete and steel into the air. The blast was much larger than the previous IED, probably an anti-tank mine or buried artillery shell. The lead tank disappeared momentarily in the cloud of debris and smoke. Gladiator 6, report status, came the urgent call from the platoon leader. 6 is mobile, minor damage only, proceeding to be objective. Maya breathed a sigh of relief as the lead tank emerged from the smoke cloud, its armor blackened but intact. The crew was still fighting, still moving toward the Marines who needed their help. She followed them through the blast crater, feeling Iron Wolf's suspension absorb the shock as they crossed the rough terrain. The final approach to the Marines' position lay just ahead, and Maya could see muzzle flashes from Building 6 where the trapped Americans were making their stand. But between Iron Wolf and those Marines lay 3 more blocks of enemy-controlled territory, and the hardest fighting was yet to come. The street narrowed suddenly as Maya guided Iron Wolf between 2 collapsed buildings that had been destroyed in earlier fighting. Rubble spilled across the roadway, creating an obstacle course that required precise navigation to avoid getting the tanks stuck or exposing their underside to hidden explosives. She downshifted and picked her way carefully through the debris field, feeling each impact as the tracks crushed concrete chunks and twisted metal. A sharp crack echoed off the surrounding walls, followed immediately by a bright flash of sparks off Iron Wolf's turret. Sniper fire, coming from an elevated position somewhere ahead. Maya instinctively hunched lower in her seat, though the armor would protect her from anything short of a heavy anti-tank round. Sniper, 11 o'clock high, Rodriguez called out, his thermal sight already tracking the source. 3rd floor of the yellow building. I see him, Williams replied grimly. Thompson, load Sabot. We're going to ventilate that building. Maya kept the tank moving while Thompson selected an armor-piercing round designed to punch through heavy protection. The Sabot round would go through the building's walls like they were made of paper, eliminating the sniper threat permanently. The main gun traversed slightly as Rodriguez refined his aim. The 120mm cannon fired with its characteristic thunderclap, and Maya watched through her vision blocks as a section of the yellow building's 3rd floor simply disappeared. Concrete blocks and window frames tumbled into the street below, followed by a cloud of dust that obscured the area for several seconds. Target destroyed, Rodriguez reported with satisfaction. No further movement in that position. But the sniper had been just a distraction. As Iron Wolf cleared the rubble field and entered a small plaza, the real ambush revealed itself. Maya saw the telltale flash of a rocket-propelled grenade launching from a ground-floor window to their right, the weapon streaking toward them faster than conscious thought could react. RPG right, she shouted. simultaneously throwing Iron Wolf into a hard left turn that sent the 70-ton tank sliding sideways across the plaza's concrete surface. The grenade passed so close to their turret that Maya could see the weapon's fins spinning as it flew by, missing them by less than 6 feet before exploding against a building behind them. The evasive maneuver saved their lives but put them in an exposed position. Maya found herself facing a narrow alley between 2 buildings, while enemy fighters emerged from concealed positions all around the plaza. Small arms fire began striking their armor from multiple directions, creating a metallic symphony of impacts that sounded like deadly hail. "Contact all around," Jackson's voice came through the intercom with forced calm. "Driver, we need to get out of this kill zone immediately." Quote. Maya saw their only option and took it without hesitation. The alley ahead was barely wider than Iron Wolf, but it offered the only covered route out of the plaza. She shifted into reverse, backed up 3 feet to line up properly, then accelerated forward into the narrow passage between buildings. The tank's width sensors screamed warnings as concrete walls closed in on both sides. Maya had perhaps 8 inches of clearance total, 4 inches on each side, with no room for error. The slightest miscalculation would wedge Iron Wolf immovably between the buildings, trapping them in a perfect target for enemy anti-tank teams. Behind them, she could hear Williams coordinating with the other tanks in the platoon. 2 had taken different routes around the plaza, while the 4th was providing covering fire to suppress the enemy fighters. The coordination was textbook perfect, but Maya's immediate concern was getting her crew through the alley alive. Halfway through the passage, disaster struck. An enemy fighter appeared on the rooftop above them, leaning over the edge with what looked like an improvised explosive device in his hands. Maya saw him for perhaps half a second before he dropped the bomb directly onto Iron Wolf's engine deck. The explosion was smaller than she'd expected, probably a homemade device with limited explosive power. But the blast occurred directly above the tank's air intake system, and Maya immediately noticed their engine power beginning to fluctuate. Warning lights flickered on her instrument panel as debris clogged the air filters. "Engine damage," she reported, fighting to keep panic out of her voice. "Power is dropping, but we're still mobile." Williams' response was immediate. "How bad?" "Maybe 60% power is available. Enough to keep moving, but not much reserve." Maya pressed harder on the accelerator, coaxing every available horsepower out of Iron Wolf's damaged propulsion system. The tank responded sluggishly but continued forward through the alley. Behind them, she could hear the other members of the platoon engaging targets throughout the plaza area. They emerged from the alley into another street, this one wider but blocked by a burning vehicle that had been positioned to create a roadblock. Maya could see that the wreckage was intentionally placed, not the result of random combat damage. The enemy had prepared multiple contingencies to channel American forces into prepared ambush sites. "Obstacle front," she announced. "Burning truck, blocking the road." Jackson assessed their options quickly. "Can you push it aside?" Maya studied the wreckage through her vision blocks. The truck was substantial, probably a commercial delivery vehicle, but Iron Wolf outweighed it by a factor of 10. With full power, pushing it aside would have been simple. With their damaged engine, the maneuver would be risky but possible. "Affirmative. Stand by." She aligned Iron Wolf with the burning truck and accelerated steadily. The tank's front slope made contact with a satisfying crunch of metal, and Maya felt the obstacle begin to yield. 70 tons of American steel proved more persuasive than enemy roadblock engineering, and the truck slid sideways across the pavement with a grinding shriek. As they pushed through the obstacle, Maya caught sight of their destination. Building 6 stood just 2 blocks ahead, its upper floors showing the distinctive pattern of defensive firing positions that Marines created when they dug in for a prolonged fight. Smoke drifted from several windows, and she could see muzzle flashes as the trapped Americans continued to engage enemy forces. But the final approach would be the most dangerous yet. The street between their current position and the Marines' building was completely exposed, with no cover and multiple enemy firing positions overlooking the route. Intelligence had been right about the enemy's strength in this area. Maya could see fighters moving between buildings, coordinating their defense with military precision. Rodriguez's voice came through the intercom with new urgency. "I'm tracking what looks like an anti-tank team setting up in the building to our left. They've got what might be a recoilless rifle or heavy machine gun." Williams immediately began coordinating the response. "All Gladiator elements, We have a heavy weapons threat in building a complex west of the objective. Request immediate suppression. The reply came from multiple tanks simultaneously. High explosive rounds began impacting the target building in rapid succession, each blast sending shockwaves through the surrounding area. Maya felt the concussions even inside Iron Wolf's protected crew compartment, and she could see debris raining down across the street ahead. But the enemy wasn't finished. As the tank platoon's fire shifted to other targets, Maya saw movement in a building they'd already cleared. Enemy fighters had reoccupied positions behind them, creating a crossfire that would catch the tanks in a deadly zone of overlapping fire. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly, but the Marines in Building 6 were still holding out. Maya could see American personnel moving on the upper floors, probably preparing for the evacuation that the tank platoon was supposed to enable. 40 lives depended on Iron Wolf and her crew reaching that building, regardless of the obstacles in their path. Maya checked her engine status one more time, grimaced at the warning lights, and prepared for the final sprint to the objective. The hardest part of the mission was still ahead of them. Maya's decision came in the space between heartbeats. The street ahead was a gauntlet of enemy fire, but waiting would only give the fighters more time to coordinate their ambush. She slammed Iron Wolf into its highest available gear and launched the damaged tank forward at maximum speed, using momentum and surprise as their primary weapons. The acceleration pressed her back into the driver's seat as Iron Wolf surged down the exposed street. Enemy muzzle flashes erupted from windows and doorways on both sides, creating a corridor of gunfire that sparkled against their armor like deadly fireworks. Maya kept the tank tracking straight down the center of the road, knowing that any deviation would expose their flanks to concentrated fire. A rocket-propelled grenade streaked past their turret, so close that Maya could feel the heat wash through her vision blocks. The weapon had been fired from a basement window at point-blank range, but the shooter had failed to account for Iron Wolf's speed. The grenade exploded harmlessly behind them, adding to the chaos but causing no damage. RPG teams in the basements, Rodriguez called out, his gun already tracking toward the next threat. They're trying to get shots at our underside as we pass. Thompson had switched to high-explosive rounds, feeding them into the main gun as fast as the automatic loader could cycle. Each shot from the 120mm cannon turned an enemy firing position into rubble, but new shooters kept appearing to replace the ones they eliminated. Maya felt something impact heavily against Iron Wolf's right track, probably a large-caliber machine gun round or possibly an anti-tank rifle. The tank shuddered but maintained course, its robust construction absorbing punishment that would have destroyed lighter vehicles. Warning lights flickered on her damage control panel, but nothing indicated critical systems failure. Track damage on the right side, she reported, feeling the subtle change in Iron Wolf's handling. Still mobile, but turning radius is compromised. The information was crucial for Williams, who immediately adjusted their tactical approach. A tank with damaged tracks couldn't maneuver as effectively, making them more vulnerable to enemy anti-tank teams. They would have to rely on firepower and armor rather than mobility to survive the next few minutes. Building 6 appeared directly ahead, its facade scarred by weeks of fighting but still standing strong. Maya could see Marines in the upper windows, their weapons trained outward as they provided covering fire for the approaching tanks. Some of them had noticed Iron Wolf's approach and were already preparing for the evacuation. But between Maya and those Marines lay the most heavily defended section of the entire route. Enemy fighters had concentrated their best weapons here, knowing that any rescue attempt would have to pass through this final choke point. Anti-tank missiles, recoilless rifles, and heavy machine guns were positioned to create overlapping fields of fire that would challenge even the most advanced armor. The first anti-tank missile launched from a rooftop position, 200 meters ahead. Maya saw the flash and smoke signature of the weapon's ignition, followed by the distinctive trail of a wire-guided missile tracking toward them. This wasn't a simple RPG that could be avoided with evasive maneuvers. This was a serious anti-tank weapon designed specifically to destroy vehicles like Iron Wolf. "Missile inbound," she shouted, simultaneously throwing the tank into the hardest right turn that her damaged tracks would allow. The 70-ton vehicle skidded sideways across the pavement, its damaged right track screaming against the concrete as Maya fought to present their frontal armor toward the incoming threat. The missile struck Iron Wolf's front slope at an oblique angle, exactly where the armor was thickest and most sloped. The warhead detonated with tremendous force, sending a shockwave through the entire tank that left Maya's ears ringing despite her protective headset. Debris rained down on them, and her vision blocks were temporarily obscured by smoke and flying concrete. "Status report," Williams called out urgently. Maya quickly scanned her instruments while checking their mobility. Frontal armor held. Some vision blocks damaged, but all systems are still green. We're still in the fight. Rodriguez was already engaging the missile team's position, his thermal sight cutting through the smoke to identify targets. "Got 'em. Building with the red roof, second-story window. Thompson, load sub-O." The armor-piercing round punched through the building's concrete wall as if it were made of cardboard, eliminating the anti-tank team in a cloud of debris. But Maya knew there would be more weapons, more teams, more obstacles between them and the Marines. Iron Wolf lurched suddenly as another impact struck their left side. This time it was a recoilless rifle round, a weapon designed to punch through tank armor at close range. Maya felt the tank rock on its suspension and saw new warning lights appear on her damage control panel. "Left side armor penetration," Thompson reported, his voice tight with concern. "No fire, but we've got internal damage to secondary systems." Maya checked her engine performance and found their power output dropping even further. The cumulative damage was beginning to take its toll on Iron Wolf's combat effectiveness, but they were less than 100 meters from Building 6. She could see Marines in the windows preparing to move, their faces tense with anticipation. The street in front of Building 6 had been turned into a fortress. Concrete barriers, overturned vehicles, and improvised obstacles created a maze that would force any approaching vehicle to slow down and expose itself to concentrated fire. Maya realized that a conventional approach would be suicide, even for a tank as heavily armored as Iron Wolf. Her solution was unconventional but decisive. Instead of following the street to its planned terminus, Maya turned Iron Wolf 90 degrees to the left and drove straight through the ground floor of an abandoned building. The tank's mass and momentum carried them through brick walls and wooden support beams like they were tissue paper. The building collapsed behind them in a cloud of dust and debris, but Maya had created a completely unexpected approach route that bypassed most of the enemy's prepared defenses. Iron Wolf emerged from the rubble directly adjacent to Building 6, close enough that the Marines could see their faces through the tank's vision blocks. "Outstanding driving," Jackson said with genuine admiration. "Get us into position for extraction." Quote, Maya maneuvered Iron Wolf until its heavily armored bulk provided cover between Building 6 and the main enemy positions. The tank's presence immediately reduced the amount of incoming fire, giving the Marines the protection they needed to begin their withdrawal. Williams was already coordinating with the Marine unit commander, establishing communication protocols and extraction procedures. The other tanks in the platoon were moving to support positions, creating a corridor of armored protection that would allow the trapped Americans to reach safety. But Maya noticed something troubling on her damage control display. Their fuel consumption had increased dramatically due to the engine damage, and their ammunition was running dangerously low. Iron Wolf had absorbed tremendous punishment getting to this position, and she wasn't certain the tank would survive the withdrawal under heavy fire. Through her vision blocks, Maya watched as the first Marines began rappelling down from Building 6's upper floors, using ropes to reach Iron Wolf's protective shadow. Their faces showed the strain of days under siege, but their movements remained disciplined and professional. These were elite troops who had held out against overwhelming odds, waiting for rescue that many of them probably thought would never come. The evacuation was beginning, but Maya knew the hardest part was still ahead. Getting 40 Marines out of enemy territory would require Iron Wolf to perform beyond its damaged capabilities, and there was no guarantee that any of them would make it home alive. The Marines moved with practiced efficiency despite their exhaustion. Maya watched through her vision blocks as small groups of 2 and 3 descended from Building 6, each man carrying wounded comrades or essential equipment. Their squad leaders directed the evacuation with hand signals, maintaining noise discipline even as bullets continued to snap overhead. Staff Sergeant Martinez, the Marine unit commander, reached Iron Wolf first. He pounded twice on the tank's hull before Jackson opened his commander's hatch to establish direct communication. Maya could hear their urgent conversation through the intercom as they coordinated the extraction sequence. 43 total personnel, Martinez reported quickly. 6 walking wounded, 2 stretcher cases. We've got intel packages that can't fall into enemy hands. plus 3 EPWs that we captured during the siege. Quote, enemy prisoners of war complicated the evacuation significantly. Maya realized they would need to accommodate additional personnel beyond the original 40 Marines, and Iron Wolf was already operating with reduced capabilities. Math was becoming increasingly difficult. Rodriguez called out new threats from his gunner's position, enemy reinforcements moving in from the east. Looks like at least 2 squads with heavy weapons, approximately 300 meters out. The enemy had apparently decided that losing the trapped Marines was unacceptable. Fresh fighters were moving to cut off the evacuation route, bringing weapons specifically designed to stop armored vehicles. Maya could see dust clouds rising from their movement and the distant glint of metal that might be anti-tank missiles. Williams made the tactical decision quickly. We extract who we can carry and fight our way out now, or we wait for the other tanks and risk getting cut off completely. Maya checked Iron Wolf's fuel status and engine performance. Both readings were worse than she'd hoped. The damaged engine was consuming fuel at nearly double the normal rate, and their power output continued to decrease. They might have enough capability for one more high-speed run, but probably not 2. The engine won't sustain a prolonged engagement, she reported honestly. If we're going to move, it needs to be soon. The first group of Marines had reached Iron Wolf's position and were taking cover behind the tank's massive hull. Maya could see them through her vision blocks, dirty and tired but still maintaining their weapons and equipment with professional discipline. These men had survived days of constant combat, and they weren't going to quit now. Jackson coordinated with the other tank commanders over the radio, establishing a withdrawal plan that would provide maximum protection for the evacuating Marines. 2 tanks would lead the column, clearing obstacles and engaging enemy positions. Iron Wolf would carry the Marines in the center of the formation, while the 4th tank provided rear security. But the plan required Iron Wolf to carry personnel on its exterior, clinging to handholds and tie-down points, while the tank moved at combat speed through hostile territory. It was dangerous under the best circumstances, and potentially suicidal given their current situation. Martinez positioned his Marines around Iron Wolf with tactical precision. The strongest men took positions where they could provide covering fire during movement. The wounded were secured in the most protected locations, behind the turret and along the tank's sides where the armor was thickest. The enemy prisoners were placed under guard, but given the same protection as American personnel. Maya felt the tank settle slightly as additional weight was added to its exterior. Iron Wolf had been designed to carry external loads, but not while operating with engine damage and track problems. She would have to compensate for the changed weight distribution and reduced power output while navigating through active combat. The enemy reinforcements were getting closer. Maya could hear the distinctive sound of diesel engines approaching from multiple directions, probably pickup trucks carrying heavy weapons teams. The enemy commander was committing significant resources to prevent the Marine evacuation, which meant the withdrawal would face determined resistance. All personnel mounted, Martinez called out, ready for extraction. Jackson acknowledged and immediately got on the radio to coordinate with the tank platoon. All Gladiator elements commence extraction, Iron Wolf departing objective with personnel aboard. Maya shifted Iron Wolf into gear and began moving slowly away from Building 6. The additional weight was immediately noticeable, affecting both acceleration and steering response. She compensated by adjusting her driving technique, making smoother inputs and allowing more time for the tank to respond to control changes. The first enemy contact came as they cleared the rubble field where Maya had driven through the building. A rocket-propelled grenade fired from long range struck Iron Wolf's rear deck, detonating with tremendous force but failing to penetrate the heavy armor. The blast was close enough to shower the Marines riding on the tank's exterior with debris and smoke. Maya heard shouts from the men outside but kept the tank moving. Stopping would only make them a stationary target for follow-up attacks. She increased their speed slightly, pushing Iron Wolf's damaged engine to provide the acceleration needed to clear the immediate danger area. Rodriguez was engaging targets continuously now, his main gun firing high-explosive rounds at enemy positions as fast as Thompson could load them. Each shot created massive explosions that temporarily suppressed enemy fire, but Maya could see new muzzle flashes appearing as soon as the smoke cleared. The route back through Khalil streets was even more dangerous than the approach had been. Enemy fighters now knew exactly where the tanks were headed and had positioned themselves accordingly. Every intersection, every alley, every rooftop became a potential ambush site that required constant vigilance. An anti-tank missile streaked past Iron Wolf's turret, missing by less than 10 feet before exploding against a building behind them. Maya felt the shockwave and heard several Marines shout warnings, but the weapon had been fired hastily and failed to find its mark. She knew they wouldn't be that fortunate for much longer. Iron Wolf's engine began to labor noticeably as they climbed a slight grade leading out of the village center. The warning lights on Maya's instrument panel were becoming more insistent, and she could feel the reduced power in every control input. The tank was giving everything it had, but mechanical systems had limits that courage couldn't overcome. "Engines failing," she announced through the intercom. "Power dropping below 50% and continuing to decrease." The news was received with grim silence. Williams immediately began calculating alternatives, while Jackson coordinated with the other tanks to provide additional support, but they were still deep in enemy territory, with miles to go before reaching friendly lines. Maya pressed harder on the accelerator, coaxing every available horsepower from Iron Wolf's damaged propulsion system. Behind them, she could hear the Marines returning fire at pursuing enemy forces, their weapons adding to the symphony of combat that echoed through Khalil's narrow streets. The extraction was succeeding, but barely. 43 Marines were alive and fighting, but their survival depended entirely on Iron Wolf's ability to carry them through the gauntlet of enemy fire that lay between their current position and safety. Maya gripped the controls tighter and prepared for the final test of her skills and her tank's endurance. The engine warning alarm began chirping insistently as Iron Wolf struggled up the final hill before friendly territory. Maya could feel the massive tank losing power with each passing second, the damaged propulsion system finally succumbing to the cumulative effects of combat damage and sustained high-speed operation. Through her vision blocks, she could see the checkpoint that marked the edge of American-controlled territory, still 2 kilometers away across open ground. Behind them, enemy pursuit vehicles had emerged from Khalil's outskirts, their headlights visible in the growing dusk as they gave chase to the escaping tank column. Maya counted at least 6 vehicles, probably carrying anti-tank teams and heavy weapons specifically positioned to intercept any American withdrawal. The enemy commander had planned for this possibility and positioned assets to exploit it. Rodriguez fired the main gun one final time, sending a high-explosive round into the lead pursuit vehicle. The truck disappeared in a ball of flame and smoke, but the others continued their approach, spreading out to prevent a single shot from eliminating multiple targets. Maya realized they were facing a coordinated pursuit by experienced fighters who understood tank tactics. Iron Wolf's engine gave a distinctive shudder, followed by an ominous grinding sound that Maya had never heard before. Her instrument panel lit up with additional warning lights as secondary systems began failing in cascade. The tank was literally coming apart under the stress of sustained combat operations, but they were too close to safety to stop now. "Engine failure imminent," she announced through the intercom, her voice steady despite the gravity of their situation. "Maybe 5 minutes of power remaining, possibly less." Williams immediately got on the radio to coordinate emergency support. The other tanks in the platoon moved to provide additional covering fire, but they couldn't physically push Iron Wolf if the engine died completely. Maya would have to keep them moving through sheer determination and mechanical sympathy. The Marines riding on Iron Wolf's exterior had noticed the change in engine sound and were preparing for the possibility of having to dismount and fight on foot. Staff Sergeant Martinez passed word among his men to be ready for anything, but Maya could see the exhaustion in their faces. These Marines had already given everything they had during the siege, and asking them to fight their way across 2 kilometers of open ground might be more than human endurance could provide. A rocket-propelled grenade fired by one of the pursuit vehicles struck Iron Wolf's rear deck, directly above the engine compartment. The explosion was smaller than previous hits, but it occurred at exactly the wrong location. Maya felt the tank lurch forward as the blast severed critical fuel lines and electrical connections, turning their mechanical problems into a crisis. "Direct hit on engine deck," Thompson reported. "Multiple system failures across the board." Maya's instrument panel went dark, except for a few battery-powered gauges. The engine continued running, but with noticeably reduced power, probably operating on reserve fuel trapped in the lines rather than continuous supply from the main tanks. She had minutes at most before Iron Wolf became a 70-ton paperweight. The checkpoint ahead was close enough now that Maya could see individual American personnel manning the defensive positions. Soldiers were pointing in their direction and calling for support, probably requesting artillery fire on the pursuing enemy vehicles. But friendly fire support would take time to coordinate, and Iron Wolf didn't have time to spare. Maya made a decision that would have seemed impossible when she first arrived at Forward Operating Base Carson. She pushed Iron Wolf's failing engine beyond its design limits, demanding maximum power output regardless of the mechanical consequences. The engine responded with a surge of acceleration that pressed everyone back against the tank's hull, but Maya knew it was probably the last reserve they would get. Iron Wolf shot forward across the open ground at a speed that should have been impossible for a tank carrying external personnel and operating with extensive battle damage. Maya held the accelerator down despite every warning light on her panel, trusting in American engineering and her own ability to keep them moving until they reached safety. The pursuing enemy vehicles fell behind as Iron Wolf's final sprint opened the distance between hunter and prey. Maya could see soldiers at the checkpoint preparing to provide covering fire, their weapons trained on the approaching enemy formation. Friendly territory was less than 1 kilometer away now, close enough that they might actually make it. The engine died with a final mechanical gasp as Iron Wolf crested the last hill before the checkpoint. Maya felt the tank begin to slow as momentum carried them forward without power assistance, but gravity was working in their favor now. The checkpoint sat at the bottom of a gentle slope that would allow them to coast the final distance to safety. "Engine's dead," Maya announced calmly, "but we're going to make it." Quote. Iron Wolf rolled silently down the hill, its massive weight carrying 43 Marines and 3 enemy prisoners toward the American lines. Maya steered carefully to keep them on course, using the tank's remaining momentum to cover the final few hundred meters. Behind them, American artillery began falling on the pursuit vehicles, ending the chase with devastating effectiveness. The checkpoint guards rushed forward as Iron Wolf coasted to a stop, just inside the perimeter wire. Medical personnel were already waiting with stretchers for the wounded Marines, while intelligence officers prepared to process the enemy prisoners. The evacuation had succeeded against overwhelming odds, and every American was coming home alive. Maya remained in her driver's position as the Marines dismounted from Iron Wolf's exterior. Through her vision blocks, she watched Staff Sergeant Martinez coordinate with the checkpoint commander, probably beginning the process of debriefing and medical evaluation that would follow any combat rescue operation. Jackson climbed out of his commander's position and walked around to Maya's driver's hatch. When she opened it and emerged into the evening air, he was waiting with an expression she had never seen before. Respect. Professional acknowledgement. The kind of recognition that had to be earned through performance under fire. "Outstanding driving," he said simply. "I don't know how you kept us moving with that engine damage, but you saved every life on this tank." Williams approached from the rear of the tank, where he had been examining the battle damage. His assessment was sobering, but delivered with genuine appreciation. "Iron Wolf is done. The engine's completely destroyed, tracks hanging by 3 pins, and we've got armor penetrations in 4 different locations. By all rights, we should have been walking the last 5 kilometers. Maya looked back at the tank that had carried them through the mission. Iron Wolf sat silent and motionless, its hull scarred by bullet impacts and explosive damage, smoke still rising from the destroyed engine compartment. The machine had given everything it had and more, performing beyond its design specifications when American lives depended on it. Rodriguez and Thompson joined the informal gathering around Iron Wolf's front slope. The crew that had started the mission as 4 individuals with different backgrounds and perspectives had become something more during the crucible of combat. They had learned to trust each other completely, and the trust had made the difference between success and failure. The rescued Marines were being processed through the checkpoint, but several stopped to thank the tank crew personally. Maya found herself receiving handshakes and words of gratitude from men who understood exactly what her driving had meant for their survival. The recognition was meaningful precisely because it came from people who had shared the danger. As the sun set over the Iraqi landscape, Maya stood beside Iron Wolf and reflected on the day's events. She had been assigned to this crew because someone needed a driver, not because anyone believed she could excel in the role. The skepticism and doubt that had followed her since arriving at the base seemed distant now, replaced by the quiet satisfaction of a job done well under impossible circumstances. The whispers about being too small, too weak, wrong for tank operations had been answered not with words but with actions. Maya had proven that courage wasn't measured in physical dimensions, and that determination could overcome both mechanical limitations and human prejudice. She had driven through enemy lines when 43 lives depended on her skills, and she had brought every one of them home. The aftermath of the rescue operation unfolded with the controlled chaos typical of successful military missions. Medical teams triaged the wounded Marines with practiced efficiency, establishing priorities based on injury severity rather than rank or service branch. Maya watched through the checkpoint's floodlights as stretchers carried the most seriously injured toward waiting ambulances, their faces peaceful now that they were finally safe. Intelligence officers began the delicate process of questioning the 3 enemy prisoners, working through interpreters to extract information that might prevent future ambushes. The captured fighters sat silently under guard, their expressions revealing nothing about their thoughts on being rescued, along with the Americans they had been trying to kill just hours earlier. Maya's own crew began the standard post-mission procedures that followed every combat operation. Equipment inventories, ammunition counts, damage assessments, and preliminary after-action reports that would eventually become part of the official record. The paperwork seemed mundane after the intensity of the rescue mission, but Maya understood its importance in learning lessons that might save lives in future operations. A convoy of recovery vehicles arrived to begin the process of salvaging Iron Wolf. Maya watched as combat engineers assessed the tank's condition, documenting every piece of battle damage for later analysis. The engineers worked with professional detachment, but she could see their amazement at the extent of damage the tank had sustained while remaining operational. "Ma'am, I've been working on tanks for 15 years, one of the engineers told Maya. "I've never seen a machine take this much punishment and keep fighting. Your driving today was nothing short of miraculous." The comment came from a grizzled Sergeant First Class, whose opinion carried weight throughout the armored community. Maya accepted the praise with quiet dignity, understanding that word of the mission would spread through informal channels faster than any official report. Stories like today's became part of military folklore, inspiring future generations of soldiers who faced their own moments of truth. Colonel Harrison, the battalion commander who had been monitoring their radio frequency, arrived at the checkpoint to personally debrief the tank crews. His presence indicated the high-level attention the rescue mission had attracted, and Maya found herself standing in a circle with officers whose decisions affected thousands of soldiers across the theater of operations. "Sergeant Chen," the colonel addressed her directly, "I understand you were the primary driver for Iron Wolf during today's operation. Your crew chief speaks very highly of your performance under combat conditions." Maya maintained proper military bearing while acknowledging the recognition. "Thank you, sir. I was just doing my job." "Your job today saved 43 American lives," Colonel Harrison replied firmly. "That's the kind of performance that deserves recognition at the highest levels. I'll be recommending you for appropriate decorations, along with the rest of your crew." The mention of decorations seemed surreal to Maya, who had begun the day wondering if her crew chief would ever fully accept her as a competent driver. Military awards were reserved for exceptional performance, and she had never imagined that her driving abilities might qualify for such recognition. Staff Sergeant Martinez approached their group, still wearing the dust and grime of the siege he had endured. His Marines had been cleaned up and fed, but he remained focused on ensuring their welfare before attending to his own needs. Maya recognized the dedication of a leader who put his men first in all circumstances. "Colonel, I wanted to personally thank Sergeant Chen and her crew," Martinez said, his voice carrying the weight of genuine emotion. "My Marines wouldn't have made it out without their courage and skill." Sergeant Chen's driving through that urban environment was the finest example of tank operations I've ever witnessed. The testimonial from a Marine staff sergeant who had survived days of combat carried enormous weight with everyone present. Maya felt a sense of validation that went beyond official recognition or crew acceptance. She had earned the respect of warriors who understood what courage looked like when lives hung in the balance. Colonel Harrison nodded thoughtfully before addressing the broader group. "Today's operation demonstrates what American forces can accomplish when every individual performs at their highest level. Sergeant Chen, your example will inspire other soldiers who face similar challenges in proving their capabilities." As the formal debriefing concluded, Maya found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she had arrived at Forward Operating Base Carson as an untested replacement driver, facing skepticism from crews who doubted her physical capability for tank operations. Tonight she stood among combat veterans who spoke of her performance in terms usually reserved for legendary military actions. The transformation hadn't occurred overnight, and it hadn't been easy. Months of training, equipment, familiarization, and gradual acceptance by her crew had prepared her for today's test. But Maya understood that technical proficiency alone wouldn't have been sufficient. The mission had required something more fundamental, the willingness to push beyond perceived limitations when others depended on her performance. Iron Wolf's recovery began as specialized equipment arrived to prepare the destroyed tank for transport. Maya watched as mechanics disconnected damaged components and secured the hull for movement to a maintenance facility, where engineers would study every aspect of the battle damage. The tank that had carried them through enemy fire would become a teaching tool for future armor development. Williams approached Maya as she observed the recovery operation. His demeanor had changed completely from their first meeting 6 months earlier, when he had clearly doubted her ability to handle the responsibilities of tank driving. Now he spoke with the respect one professional shows another after shared combat experience. "Chen, I owe you an apology," he said directly. "When you first joined our crew, I focused on what I thought were your limitations instead of recognizing your potential. Today you proved that heart matters more than size when the mission gets dangerous." The acknowledgement meant more to Maya than any official recognition could provide. Williams represented the institutional knowledge and experience of the armored community, and his acceptance validated her place among tank crews throughout the military. She had overcome not just tactical challenges but cultural barriers that had existed long before her arrival. Rodriguez and Thompson joined the conversation, completing the crew that had functioned as a unified team during the rescue operation. Their camaraderie had been forged under fire, creating bonds that would endure long after their current assignment ended. Maya realized she was no longer the outsider trying to prove herself, but an integral part of a combat team that trusted each other completely. "So what's next for the Iron Wolf crew?" Thompson asked, probably wondering about their assignment now that their tank was destroyed. Williams smiled grimly. "Command wants us back in action as soon as possible. We'll get a new tank, probably one of the upgraded models with better armor protection, and we'll get to break it in together." The prospect of future missions with the same crew filled Maya with satisfaction. She had found her place among warriors who valued competence over preconceptions and who had learned to trust her skills when American lives depended on her performance. The doubts and whispers that had followed her through training were now replaced by the quiet confidence that comes from proven capability. As the evening progressed and the rescued Marines were transported to medical facilities, Maya stood one final time beside Iron Wolf's battle-scarred hull. The tank had given everything in service to its crew and mission, just as she had given everything to prove herself worthy of the trust placed in her hands. Tomorrow there would be new missions, new challenges, and probably new soldiers who needed to learn that courage comes in all sizes. But tonight, Maya Chen stood among combat veterans who spoke her name with respect, knowing that she had earned her place through actions rather than words. Sometimes the smallest person in the room proves to be exactly the right size for the job that needs to be done, and today had been her moment to demonstrate that timeless truth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.